When you walk away,
Oh
you
no.
don't hear me say. I can't hit that note, so I'm not going to try it.
I was genuinely happy the movie ended on a song. I'll say that.
Okay, hello everyone.
Which is a Final Fantasy staple to have one of these fucking songs in it.
Is Final Fantasy, or is this not very Final Fantasy, in your opinion, Matt
Well,
Gringo, my
we're not there
co-host?
yet. We'll get there.
All right, this is failed Blockbusters. This is we're talking Final Fantasy Spirits Within. I don't know why I struggled with that right now. I think the heat's getting to me more than
Diego turned his
usual.
fan off for 3 seconds and the heat is getting to him.
Yeah, it's a
So
beautiful California morning. Um, there's no dew anywhere. Life is dead.
you live in a fucking desert.
Yeah, but they lied to us our whole lives
You
over
live in a
here,
fucking desert.
and they're like, "Oh no, it's actually really cool that we established that lawns are a part of our capitalist ecosystem,
Yeah, I mean you
even
gotta
though
have
it's really bad for the
lawns.
planet."
You gotta have lawns.
You know, I'm gonna shout out someone who's no longer with us on planet Earth. My neighbor from across the street, Hilda. I cannot remember her last name. She was a little old lady
Great shout out.
who yeah, she used to watch me when I was a little guy.
In loving memory of Hilda.
Hilda, yeah, Hilda, whatever her name was. No. Okay, so there's twofold to this. I'm bringing her up because she was one of the first people I ever knew of on planet Earth who was like, "No, it's really hard to take care of a lawn in California. I'm gonna plant desert plants and stuff in the front." And so she did, and I was like, "Oh, that's weird." And then over time, I got used to it, and I was like, "This is like actually pretty cool." You know,
Mm.
it's like I don't have to. You don't have to mow the lawn. You know, you don't. You just do this, and it's like it takes care of itself, basically. She was also a racist,
Oh
but
no.
but she was, but she like looked after me when my parents had to work or something like that.
Can I tell
That's
you
not. Yeah, so that's a people are
can
complicated.
I tell
She
you
was
a
also like 100,
can
but
I
go
tell you a
ahead, go ahead.
barely related story about the people who lived across the street from my grandparents?
Yeah, sure. I just dove into like maybe the most random
Yeah,
tangent I've ever jumped
this
into.
will
So
be
go ahead.
slightly more random, but I don't know this type of grass. There's these neighbors that lived across from my grandparents their whole life that had this type of grass that you don't really have to cut it, but it only turns green during the summer, and the rest of the year it's like dead orangish, right?
Uh
Like
huh.
I don't know what it is. It's supposed to, I think it's like a certain type of desert grass. I don't know what it is, but it's interesting. Above a certain temperature, they turn green. Below it, just dies. So it's kind of fascinating. Yeah, these two women lived together across the street from my grandparents. They were very friendly, and they would come over for like barbecues and stuff like that. And they would they gave us gifts at Easter time. And I found out at a certain point they were former nuns. And I'm sitting around one day. They moved away at a certain point, and I'm sitting around one day, just on the back porch of my grandparents' house, and I'm just sitting and thinking, and I was like, oh shit, they were lesbians.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I was like,
Yeah,
wait.
exactly. Like they were lifelong friends,
Yeah.
and they lived together.
Just
Yeah,
gals being
yeah,
pals.
exactly. And it was just one of those things where I'm just sitting there, and I was like, wait a minute. You have those moments
Yeah.
that suddenly hits you, like. So very nice people. I don't. You at least remember her, what's her face's name. I
But
don't.
yeah.
I don't remember their names at all. But I hope they are doing well wherever they are. Um,
Yeah, yours weren't racists.
yeah. Well, I don't know.
So
Only knew them before they could like start expressing political opinions to me. So
okay. I
there
just
are
remember.
racist lesbians, unfortunately.
Yeah. You're right. You're right.
We like to
I just
believe that if
remember.
someone's in a marginalized group, that they respect all marginalized groups, but that's just not the fucking case.
I just remember it was one time because like she would take me to the movies sometimes too,
Mhm.
right? And there was like a trailer for some Eddie Murphy comedy or something like that. And
Oh no.
I
Oh
was like, I
no.
kind of want to see that. And she's like, well, I don't really like movies like that. No, and and this is what took me like years to figure out in hindsight. But I was like, comedies, and she was like, no. And I was like, okay.
Wow.
And it just kept happening whenever it was like a non-white person in the
Okay,
lead
yeah.
role.
Because I was gonna say,
So
like, for all you know, it could have been a trailer for Norbit. Like, I would have understood being like, I don't like movies like that.
no.
But it,
I'm talking older, like 2002, 2003,
I mean, that
maybe just after this movie came
The
out.
Adventures of Pluto and Ash is around that time. Warner Brothers, what used to be Warner Brothers' biggest flop. Uh,
Oh yeah, is it not anymore? Did the Flash do that
there was a
badly?
headline that said The Flash is now a bigger flop than The Adventures of Pluto and Ash. Now, I don't know how true that is, but it's funny to think about.
I'm gonna say it's true. That is the most incredible statement I've ever heard
I
in my
guess we're
entire
gonna have to
life.
do The Adventures of Pluto and Ash now. Like at some
How the
point, we'll have to do it.
I don't think you or I have ever brought that movie up
I know
in
it's
these
never been one, but there
conversations.
was a kind of
Huh.
like when that movie came out, there was a like, why does this exist? And then you're like, why did it cost $100 million to make? Like,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that's irresponsible to spend $100 million on a comedy like that. Anyways, speaking of irresponsible, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within,
yes,
the 2001 American-Japanese co-production, it's a computer animated science fiction film directed by Hironobu Sakaguchi,
yes,
creator
the
of the Final
creator.
Fantasy franchise.
This is basically his end with the franchise.
Oh, why is that?
Well, the movie didn't do very well.
No, there's a reason it's on this list.
Yes,
Remember, these are failed blockbusters, critically or at the box office, but not always in our hearts.
and this feels like a movie that maybe has truly never earned any money back.
I know. No, we
Like,
should talk about that. Where it's like, the writer of Men in Black is like, "Hey, yeah, I've never gotten residuals on it because, financially speaking, the studio has only lost money on it.
mhm.
That's why there's 4 sequels, an attempt at a spin-off, an animated series, endless merchandise, but it's never been successful financially.
Well,
So he's never seen a cent from it."
look, I get where that guy's coming from. None of that shit has anything to do with the spirits within.
Okay, okay.
Not at all. In fact, I think the big complaint people have about this movie, and the reason why maybe it stopped it from having any sort of audience, is that there's basically nothing in this to do with Final Fantasy at all.
But it's anime.
No,
That's what people's brains think.
I don't even think that though, because this isn't like the computer generated anime stuff has only kind of taken off in recent years. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is there's a couple weird outliers. Like did you watch? We've talked about Toonami, but did you watch Blue Submarine #6 when it aired?
I did not.
That was like a mini series, and part of that was it was a mix of kind of traditional Japanese animation and new like CGI, like I believe like a bunch of like ships and monsters in it were more computer generated 3D type stuff. And it was
Mm.
like pitched as the future of animation, you know.
Yeah. Oh, you know what I remember? Reboot, which is like
Reboots.
even before this, like way
Yeah.
before this. But when you think of like the CG animated stuff, that's where my mind jumps
And
to. I
reboot
think that was the
probably
first thing I saw.
reboot around the time of like that's from Canada, right? Like and that's like
I
a
think
few
so.
years before this movie.
Yeah,
So
and I couldn't even tell you anything about it. I just see like the images in my head, you know.
there's some that has I don't remember the names of any of the characters. They're all like Dot and like Matrix. Like that's all their names, right? Like
Hmm.
they're all computer terms. All I
CPU or whatever.
Yeah. All I know, the one was Mouse, who was like she was kind of like a thief, I believe. And all I remember is that like the whenever the user, who's basically God, plays a video game, it comes down in like this purple cube, and the citizens of Computerland have to win the game, and if they lose, that section of the city gets like destroyed. Like that's the plot of that show.
That's a little scary.
It's weird. It's a weird one. And then it got like oddly intense where I think if I remember correctly, because I remember it kind of messing me up, is that like season 2 ends with like the hero not being killed, but basically being like removed from the story. Like he's gone. Like the bad guy wins, and then there's like a time jump at the end of between season 2 and 3, and the little kid is now like a grown adult who's like a hardened badass because of how miserable life has been to him in the intervening years.
Jesus.
Yeah, I remember that vividly. It was a pretty intense show for a kid's
I
show.
should I should watch Reboot.
There's been a
Reboot
part of me.
Retrospective.
There's been a part of me that's like, should I go back to Reboot? And then I just never do. Like, I feel like it's one of those things where there's like, I remember those moments and nothing else for a reason. Like,
Yeah.
so what's your history with the Final Fantasy?
Oh yeah. Everyone I went to school with played Final Fantasy games. I had no fucking knowledge of this. My eventual introduction to Kingdom Hearts or to Final Fantasy was Kingdom Hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Like a year after this movie's released, right?
Yeah, I think that was the
So,
gateway drug for most kids our age.
yeah, and I was like, "Oh, who the fuck is Sephiroth?" Like, I'm hanging out with Donald and Goofy. Like, what is this? You know? And then it's like, "Oh, this guy has a sword that's a gun."
Yeah,
Like
Squall, whatever
Cloud.
the fuck his name is.
Yeah. And it kind of blew my mind. I was like, this is like really cool.
Mm.
And now I'm like, it's still like really cool, but it's also like, it's so nerdy.
I know it
You
is
know?
insanely nerdy, but there was a window where, I mean, when you're younger, Kingdom Hearts comes across as a little badass, right? Like, it's so goofy to say
Yeah.
when you're like 8, it's like, why is this fucking poster for a Disney game so dour? Like,
Yeah.
why is it so contemplative? And that's all the Final Fantasy posters. They feel like, because Final Fantasy X was huge around that time. And that was probably the first. Me and my sister used to play those games together all the time because we couldn't really do it on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it was, no offense to my sister, but a lot of it was me kind of coming in and beating the bosses. But they were challenges. Like,
Oh, are you saying girls can't play video games?
that's exactly what I'm saying. No,
Yeah.
I'm saying my sister was 2 years younger than me, is what I'm saying.
No, I totally get it.
Yeah.
So I would game a lot with my cousins too. Even to this day, like I play the Spider-Man games with my cousin whenever the new Insomniac ones come out.
Mm-hmm.
I just spend like a weekend with my cousin and we just plow through them, right?
Yeah.
But back in the day, it was like, because I got a lot of cousins, and so when we'd all get together for family stuff, whatever, there'd be an Xbox or something, or like if we're playing like Halo, one of my younger cousins would be like, "Oh, I want to play too," and she's like 6 at the time, right? It's like, okay, sure. So we give her a controller that's not on, and be like, "You're the bottom right," and it'd be like my other cousin.
Well,
maybe that was mean.
Hey,
but
as long as she
whatever.
never caught on.
I don't have the heart to tell her.
Hey, she had fun.
Yeah.
I'm sure my older cousins did similar shit to me. I remember them playing GoldenEye and being like, "You're too young to play this." But hey, what are you gonna do? What was so? Yeah, we played a lot of that. I think I've told this story for some reason on this podcast, but I did not understand the RPG mechanics of Kingdom Hearts when I first played it. Like, I just kind of played it as an action game.
Same.
And I didn't know you could like upgrade equipment. I made it all the way to the final boss without ever upgrading the Keyblade.
No, literally me too.
Yeah,
that was the same Keyblade the entire time.
Like, can you imagine why we did? Now that's like a challenge mode for people, and we did it like as children.
Just because I didn't know any better.
It did take us, for me, like it had to have taken like 2 or 3 months to do that though, and then I never could beat the final boss. And then later, when I figured out, oh, you can upgrade the Keyblade, was when I like finally went back and beat him. Ansem, who turned out not to really be Ansem, but like the plots of those games, believe it or not, don't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
But that was the gateway into Final Fantasy. And again, like those covers, there's something so imposing about the name Final Fantasy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you agree,
yeah.
It's the Final Fantasy? Like, what does that mean?
That's why there's 15 of them now?
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. It's like, why is there 10 of them? Like, when I'm a kid, it's like, why is that the thing? And it's then you play it and it's like some goofy ass shit, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
put the clip of Titus laughing here from Final Fantasy X, which is a real thing that happens in the middle of that game. But they're told with such a like every story is like a grim story about the world being destroyed by evil. Like, and yeah, and then for some reason there was this movie just out there in the ether that I remember the posters for. I remember they had the giant like cardboard, like remember they used to do cardboard stand-ins that just spelled Final Fantasy. And I remember that image of our main character with the reflection through the water.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that being everywhere for a while. And then it just like disappeared, and like I had no idea why that was the Final Fantasy movie, what that had to do with Final Fantasy, how there are 10 of them and how they're all connected, because just looking from the outside in, they all seem like different stories, which they are.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
didn't understand that as a kid. And then this movie just kind of, even as my appreciation for Final Fantasy grew over the years, because I would play X and then I went back, and thankfully with the PS2 was backwards compatible with the PlayStation 1, so it was very easy to go back and play a bunch of PS1 games, which is how I was introduced to most of the Final Fantasy games. Because that had we'll get into the history of Final Fantasy in the States soon, but the PlayStation 1 had the largest collection of the series at the time. And I still didn't understand where this movie fit, and then I would catch it on cable every now and then. Played on the Sci-Fi Channel a lot from my memory. Still have no idea. And yeah, that's a whole. We'll get into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to note that Final Fantasy stuff is inherently disconnected. There's no plot or character relations to each other, which is something I struggled with because it was like, no, well, they're sequels, so they have to be connected.
Yeah, yeah,
And shout out to my friend from middle school, Gerald Kumagai, who was like the biggest Final Fantasy guy at the school, and he tried to educate me, and I just could not understand. I was like, no, there's X2 now, so it's a sequel. Like, why isn't it a sequel? I didn't understand. My brain would not
that's
compute.
that's the other thing for when I was younger is that like you would see that X2 poster, and it would to me it's this will be anyone who's played X2, this will sound hysterical, but it had the same vibe looking at that cover as my dad's poster for Godfather Part 2. Like, because, I'm too young to watch those movies. And I'm like, this movie is such an epic. There are 2 parts, and they're in the big they're in the big VHS cases, which means they're like really long. I'm like, what happens in these movies? Like, and then I'm looking at these Final Fantasy games, and especially the PlayStation 1 versions, a lot of them came on multiple discs. I believe 7 is on 3 discs. And it's like, how is that possible? Like, what is this? Like, how epic is it? And then why are there 10 of them? Like, this must be the story of a generation. Like, this series must have all the answers in it if it's that long. Like,
And I mean, you know what? It is kind of like the story of like the video game
no,
generation, like at
certainly.
least that '90s run.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for our age, it's still very important.
yeah.
I don't know.
Especially 6, 7, and 8. I think those seem to be the ones people refer to as like the greatest Final Fantasies.
Um,
Generally speaking, generally,
yeah,
I'm not even saying those are my favorite.
yeah,
I
I'd
haven't
probably
played all of
place
them.
9 probably higher up there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I've not heard that.
You really 9 seems like the hipster take to me, number one, and I'm kind of in the hipster camp on that one.
Okay. All right. All right. That's
We'll
fine.
get to that. And yeah, you know what though? Like I don't know about it because I know it seems like this weird thing. I remember when Final Fantasy VIII came out, it kind of got savaged by critics. Not 8, 13. I mean, did I say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when 13 came out, it kind of got savaged, and that's one where it's like 13, 13 2. Final Fantasy 13 Lightning Returns. Like it's basically
Yeah.
a trilogy of games, and it's supposed to be insane long. I've never played it, but like it's this weird thing now where it seems like when everyone comes out, it kind of gets savaged, and then a pocket of nerds defend it.
Mm-hmm.
Final Fantasy 14, which is an MMO, was savaged upon release, but then I believe that one like is genuinely turned around, like with a bunch of updates that they put the effort in to make it a good game. Um, 15, don't know much about, but 16 just dropped. As we're recording it, 16 just came out, and Diego was a little concerned when he saw something trending on Twitter the other day, and I had to inform him that it was a Final Fantasy thing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it was like Meteor, and I was like, oh no.
It's like, no, it's this. They think this guy from Final Fantasy's hot. Don't worry.
Yeah, I'm just gonna assume that from now on.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what's this concerning thing trending? Oh, someone's just horny. Okay.
World War III's trending. It's Final Fantasy. No need to worry about that.
No, not even Final Fantasy related. Just someone out there super horny.
Yeah, well, that's you. Yeah, you're probably right. That's probably.
Yeah.
So here's something that happened to me recently that I was not expecting. So, I guess they're cousins. It's a little hard to understand, but like my uncles got married to someone who already had kids, so now like we're related, and I get along with them. And one of them got married, went to the wedding, and he might be listening to this podcast. I know he is aware that I do this podcast, and he might have clicked on this episode. And I go up and I'm talking to him. We're just talking about shit, and somehow I was like, "What have you been up to?" And he's like, "I've been wait." He's like, "I might duck out of here early because I'm waiting for my." I ordered a PS5 and it should arrive tonight. I was like, "Oh, all right. Why'd you get it?" He's like, "Well, the Final Fantasy game just came out, and like I want to play it." And like I had no idea this guy was into Final Fantasy. And so we ended up talking about Final Fantasy and anime for a little bit. But he was like, "Yeah, I got a PS5 just to play the new Final Fantasy game."
You know what? I have to respect that because I'm one of those fucking schmucks who just bought the PS5 for Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
So.
I'm probably coming up on getting it too. Like that might be
Yeah.
for the Spider-Man
Like,
game and the Final Fantasy game. So
yeah, I think I'll give the new Final Fantasy a shot because I haven't played one since 10X or 10.2. X2, whatever. See, it's
12
already getting confusing.
12 is actually pretty good. Final Fantasy 12 is actually pretty good for the PS2, but that's one where they kind of changed the mechanics, so people aren't like a giant fan of it. But yeah. So yeah, I haven't played. I haven't played 13 through 16, which is what the newest one is. So
yeah. I mean, I've never even played like the original couple. Like my touchstones really are 6 to 9
so
or
you
6
want to
to
talk
10.
about the history of Final Fantasy?
Sure.
So as a series,
Yeah.
so we got Hironobu Sakaguchi, sorry, is the creator of it.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was fumbling with the fucking tabs. Famously, Square, which before it merged with Enix, was just Square, which was a Japanese video game developer. They had made some video games. They weren't doing very well. They were basically like, look, we got one more game. Like we can only really afford to make one more game. And if it isn't a hit, it's going to sink the company. So they make a game called Final. That's why it's called Final Fantasy, because it was probably going to be their final game. They make it for the Famicom, which is the Japanese name for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's a surprise hit. It becomes this big kind of fantasy RPG hit. It's part of the RPG wave that's happening in Japan at the time. It gets ported over here. A sequel gets made. Final Fantasy II gets made for the Famicom. It is not released in the United States. As is Final Fantasy III, also made for the Famicom. So 2 and 3 aren't released in the United States. Because RPGs aren't as big over here at the time. Like, computer RPGs are kind of big, but that's an incredibly niche audience. RPGs are still in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Right.
And at the time, Dungeons and Dragons are like the nerdiest thing you could be into, because anime hasn't come over here yet. And it's also, if you are from the Midwest, it is also a gateway to Satanism. So,
yeah. Here's the thing. I gotta say really quickly, because like Stranger Things has the whole Dungeons and Dragons like subculture thing that kind of runs through the entire show. I really want to see someone who does a Stranger Things-esque show, but for 90s kids who get really into anime.
No, 100%. Yeah, just do that. I'm waiting for the anime thing to really start. Like, you're starting to see it where you have directors in interviews saying they were influenced by anime, like slightly on their projects, but it hasn't hit in the way that I want it to, you know?
Yeah. It'll fucking happen. It's anime's never been more popular over here. So
it's that, and the fact that video games now seem to be the next IP thing that people are going to start diving into.
Yeah. Also, it's literally impossible to go to Anime Expo in Los Angeles now, unless you want to be crammed into a can of fucking sardines.
Yeah.
So
So
it'll happen soon.
it's coming, and then it'll be ruined for everyone. But
Yeah.
and then what's after anime? What's the nerdy thing after anime?
Death.
You
Flatliners.
know what I think it's gonna be? No joke. You know what I think it'll be?
What?
Furries. I really
I
do.
was.
I think.
I think I brought it up before. I thought the direction was going to be like fantasy adventure stuff
Hmm.
because there's a lot of it coming out still, and there's stuff like in the works. And I was like, maybe this is the move, but it might just be too expensive.
Mhm.
You know, video game stuff. You could just be like, oh, it's a prestige show like The Last of Us,
Yeah, a little
or
bit. Like,
whatever.
you have the prestige, but like that's also they're all kind of fantasy adjacent, like
Yeah,
so I see that being
yeah.
the next thing.
Furries, it makes sense,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I feel sorry for that community because it's probably very strong as a subculture, and once that gets thrust into the mainstream, it's going to be disastrous.
Did you ever see the Purge election year?
No, I did not. Is there
Yeah,
furries in it?
there's like a killer furry like in a suit, and then he gets shotgunned down in the street, and I cheered in the theater.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
Well,
okay. It's not as good as the second one.
if I feel
So
like the opposite would happen in a purge world. Because you see the right keeps trying to weaponize furry as like something parents should be afraid of.
oh yeah, but furries like there's that one like furry gamer who's like really leftist, and he keeps winning like
Oh
tournaments
yeah,
or
that was
whatever.
whoever that was for a while. I can't remember his name. It was something Fox, I think. Um, was it like Blue Fox? I don't fucking know.
I don't know. Like I don't know none of these words are in the Bible.
But that seems to be a thing. And like it's that thing they're trying to be like, if we look at these furries, if we allow kids to transition, if we allow trans kids to transition, what's next? We're gonna allow people to become their personas. Like that's 100% what they're trying to do.
You know what? Maybe Avatar is the key to saving the world.
Hey, maybe.
There's something here. My brain can't put all the pieces together, but it's percolating something.
Yeah, percolating's a word.
Yeah, it is. That's a real word. I know dictionaries.
But anyway, back to the history of Final Fantasy in the States.
Yes, I apologize for that.
So then 4 and 6 get released in the United States on the Super Nintendo. They skip 5 and they're renamed Final Fantasy 2 and 3. So as far as America's concerned, there's a trilogy of Final Fantasy games. Final Fantasy 6, which is 3 here, that one is usually a contender among people as best in the series. Some people really like that one. That's the one with the evil clown man who's the villain.
Oh yeah, who doesn't love that guy?
I mean, great stuff. Great stuff. But then an interesting thing happens in our culture and the world. So the Super Nintendo was like this RPG machine in Japan. But like RPGs still were popular. A few of them made it over here, but not a lot. And like a lot of the ones that did bombed. Famously, the video game Earthbound, which is Mother 2 in Japan, bombed horribly in the United States. And now like the cartridges of it go for like hundreds of dollars. And now it's considered one of the greatest video games of all time, right? Like RPGs just weren't connecting over here for some reason. Who really knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's the world of video games was changing going into the mid 90s. Nintendo, which had dominated the market, had been fought to like a 50-50 standing in the States. They still dominated Japan, but they had been fought to a standstill in the United States by Sega. And at the same time, Sony is making word that they want to get into the video game industry. They almost work with Nintendo, right? Do you know this whole story about the Nintendo PlayStation?
I don't actually.
All right, this is
So
kind of
please.
important. So I'm just,
Okay.
it legit is important to this discussion.
No, I believe you. Yeah, yeah.
So Sega, in an attempt to keep market dominance, announces the Sega CD, which is an add-on you can get for the Genesis that plays these brand new things called CDs. It's not cartridge based; it's CD based, and it's like a big deal. It's not really that much of a financial success, but it's enough to scare Nintendo to be like, we have to do a CD add-on to our Super Nintendo. They meet with Sony, and Sony's like, we would love to do this. Sony gets to work. They basically make a working prototype of what is called the Super Nintendo PlayStation. It's called a PlayStation because your Super Nintendo will sit on top of it, right? That's where the name comes
Mm-hmm.
from. It's functioning. There's a few working prototypes out there in the wild that like get sold at auction for like insane amounts of money. It can play Super Nintendo and PlayStation games. Um, Sony is starting to make their own games. They go to the Consumer Electronics Show, I believe 1993. They come out and they announce, we have signed a deal with Nintendo. We are making this PlayStation, and it's going to be a big hit. We're going to do it. The next day, Nintendo gives a presentation and announces they are doing a Super Nintendo CD add-on with a company called Philips, not Sony. They just totally fucked them live. Like, they didn't even tell Sony that they were backing out of the deal.
That's fucking
They
crazy.
just did it. So the PlayStation is basically made out of spite against Nintendo. They announced it with Philips. The CD add-on never materializes, but there is the Philips CDI, which is one of the biggest flops in gaming history. And that's where you get all those weird Zelda games. Because part of the deal Nintendo made with Philips was that Philips could use some Nintendo characters for their console. So that's where you get those like really terrible Zelda animated games, which like get memed every now and then. So Sony pivots. They make the PlayStation CD based. Sega makes the Saturn CD based. Nintendo decides to pivot, stick with cartridges for the Nintendo 64. The 64, which is twice as powerful as both the PlayStation and the Saturn, but uses cartridges, which uses a lot less memory. They're a lot more expensive to manufacture, which is a cost that I believe gets passed on to the game publishers themselves, not Nintendo. Nintendo doesn't eat that cost. It fucks it. All the third party people are unhappy with Nintendo sticking to cartridges, so they all pivot to the PlayStation because the Saturn was basically dead on arrival and the PlayStation was a huge hit. The PlayStation goes on to be the most successful game console of all time. And like it's not even close between Nintendo and the Saturn. Like it's not a 50-50 split. They basically get 75% of the market with the PlayStation. It just destroys everyone. And Square, which was developing Final Fantasy VII for the Nintendo 64, decides we're not doing that. We're going with PlayStation. And it pisses Nintendo off massively. They basically had a beef for like a decade. And 7 premieres on the PlayStation 1. And it is one of the biggest video games of all time. And that is probably the moment RPGs, specifically JRPGs, go mainstream.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
And so Final Fantasy VII does better than any of the Final Fantasies have done in the States before. It's this massive financial hit. It's like getting advertised during the Super Bowl. Like, it's suddenly massive. It was so massive that Sony, when it was time for the Dreamcast to come out in like '99, they made sure that Final Fantasy VIII came out on the same day as the Dreamcast. So they thought Final Fantasy, the brand, was so powerful in '99 that the game itself could deter people from buying a new console.
Jesus.
So it's massive. It's huge. So they get a little bullish on Final Fantasy being this now mainstream brand. For one, all the Japanese Final Fantasy games, save for 3, that weren't released in the United States, get ported and released onto the PlayStation console. So that's why the PlayStation has Final Fantasy 5 through 9 on it as a result, and 1 and 2. So the only one not on there is 3 of the original run. And they bring over like Chrono Trigger and like a few other games that were made for the Super Nintendo weren't released in the United States, and now because now the PlayStation becomes this JRPG machine, and I think that's what its reputation is even into the PS2, right? It's like JRPGs and survival horror, which are two things that Nintendo were reluctant to touch in the United States.
Hmm.
So you get that. That's why I think the other video game adaptation that comes around the time of Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within is Resident Evil, because that's how strong those two names were at the time. And Resident Evil famously doesn't have a lot to do with the actual video game, but it's a lot closer than this movie.
Yeah, yeah. It still has like enough touchstones where people like that is people's introduction to Resident
Yeah,
Evil for
some
a lot
people
of
that
them.
is their gateway into Resident Evil,
Yeah.
which is what causes a lot of contention between certain fans. But
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that will be a whole other discussion. So part of making Final Fantasy VII involved investing all this money into 3D technology and like pre-rendered cutscenes, which were very new at the time. Like cutscenes were new, right?
Hmm.
Like this wasn't a thing that really happened. And someone at Square was like, we can make a movie out of this stuff. And they started messing around with it, and they were like, they did a couple animation tests and were like, why don't we make a movie using this technology? Like, if we're going to invest in this 3D technology, we should expand our company. We should also become a film company. We should make movies, and that's where it really comes from. They just had this technology, and 3D animation seems like it's going to be the future. Toy Story comes out in like '96, right?
Hmm.
And people are like, this could be the future. Why don't we try? CGI seems to be a thing. Why don't we try to make a whole movie out of this stuff? And that's where it comes from. Sakaguchi, who was the father of the series, is like, I'm going to direct it, and he sits it out on Final Fantasy 3. I mean, not Final Fantasy 8. He's a little more of like an executive producer, and comes back to do 9, which comes out before. That'll be important later. I'll discuss that. But he basically takes over as he's going to direct it, and they get really bullish on the thing, and the budget keeps ballooning, and it becomes one of the most expensive movies ever made at the time of its release.
I believe the inflated cost of the movie is like 220 million
Yeah,
nowadays, right?
it's something crazy like that.
Which,
And
yeah,
that's only the reported budget. Allegedly, the budget was a lot higher.
I
Like,
believe that.
like they way overestimated what they were able to do. And
Oh my gosh, somewhere out there, James Cameron just got like a boner.
I know it's
Like,
like a weird forerunner to Avatar, and we'll talk about like why this failed and Avatar succeeded, like what Cameron realized had to work to
mhm.
sell this type of stuff to people. But yeah, now here's where there's this is I told you about how Final Fantasy IX is maybe my favorite of the series,
Yeah,
but it's divisive with some fans. Now 7 is that game is kind of the one that's the gateway for a lot of people, but that one takes a weird pivot where it's not as high like there's always been a weird mix of technology and fantasy in the Final Fantasy series. That's kind of the thing, but it's still kind of as a each one still had a bit of a more medieval setting, right? Like 6 is the one where it has a bit more of a steampunk vibe, but
hmm,
7 it's basically like it's a world where all the magic is dead and technology is taken over. Like technology based on magic, but it has a more techno, almost cyberpunk vibe to it, like aesthetically, not
yeah,
not thematically.
and not to get into a whole other thing, but that does feel like I agree. I think that's maybe the one people kind of go to as the great Final Fantasy game, like the
Yeah.
greatest, and I think maybe the most influential on a lot of
Mhm.
up and coming artists, like in the sci-fi, fantasy, steampunk, cyberpunk genre realms.
Yeah.
Like that one seems to be heavily influential on a lot in
and
hindsight.
and 8 just takes the ball and runs with it, where it's straight up like set at like a military academy, like it's almost Starship Troopers is Final
Yeah.
Fantasy 8. Like, and the weird pivots the Final Fantasy the original run makes is such a running gag that there's actually a video you can find it. The one of the Mega 64 guys made it. I don't know if you know who they are.
No, no,
They
sorry.
they do the like they remake Dragon, like seasons of Dragon Ball in like 5 minutes. So it's like
Okay.
the Cell games in 5 minutes. but they have an oddly strong connection to the video game industry. Like they have these weird connections. They got uh, Sakaguchi to do a video with them, and the joke is he has one more video game on his contract, and he wants to finish it so he can pivot to his real dream of becoming a hip hop artist. It's the actual Sakaguchi in the video. I want to stress that. But the clause in the contract is if the video game's a hit, he has to make a sequel to it. So the joke is every Final Fantasy game has been his attempt to get fired. Like he keeps like making crazy shit up in an attempt to get fired from the company. And the climax is we should make a movie. And then the movie is finally what does it. And then he's like fired, and then he's like, okay, now I can become a fucking hip hop artist. That's the joke. But like I said, so Final Fantasy IX is a weird game because unlike 7 and 8, which kind of pivot more in like a technology direction, it wants to pivot back to what classic Final Fantasy is with more of a medieval setting while also riffing on the new themes added. So it like 9 is almost like a victory lap of the whole series. But some of the fans brought in by 7 and 8 are put off by that, you know? Like, they're like, we don't want this high fantasy shit, blah, blah, blah. I think now it has mellowed out, that people are a little cooler with those sorts of things. And then they kind of see the whole series as one. But I think it explains why Final Fantasy The Spirits Within has the bare minimum of fantasy elements in it. Because I think they were looking at this as the logical progression from 7, as opposed to making it part of the series as a whole, right?
Yeah.
That's why this movie, it doesn't really feel like it's more straightforward science fiction than anything else. In fact, it's categorized as a science fiction film, even though there are fantasy elements in it, and I think those elements are what throw people for the biggest loop.
You want to just get into it now?
Well, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I don't know that much more about the production history, but I just know it took like an accumulative like 200 people to put in what would
and they set up
approximately be 120 years of work. If you took all their hours together, that's how much time was spent on it,
and
which
they
is
set
like psychotic.
Up offices in Hawaii because they thought, well, Hawaii's in the middle of Japan and Hollywood, so this will be a great place, but it's like 10 times more expensive to make a movie out of Hawaii. So that didn't help things. Yeah, and they were really bullish. And this is our next. We've done 2 Sony movies in a row, by the way. I don't know if you noticed that.
Oh no, yeah, that's right.
So Sony can't make the movies work for whatever reason.
Looking forward to that Craven.
Oh no.
Apologies to JC Chandor.
They do Men in Black, right? Like
they do Men in Black.
So Men in Black is like a few years before that. That's their really big hit. In fact, on the DVD, I got the special edition for Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. 2-disc special edition, which has an insane number of special features because they really thought this was going to be the future of cinema at some point. It comes with previews for Men in Black and Starship Troopers. So I'm like, that's interesting. So yeah, movie comes out. It makes like $7 million opening weekend.
Fucking hell.
Coming out against Legally Blonde, which just fucking destroyed it. Yeah, it was a bomb. They haven't. I think it has hurt the Final Fantasy brand in terms of movie recognition, even though with this boom of video game adaptations that is about to happen, Sony would be insane to not try and do something with Final Fantasy. They've done a few more direct-to-video movies that have nothing to do with this film. And yeah, there's some other stuff out there. But they've never tried to go mainstream like this ever again. So, Diego, what did you think of Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within?
I wanted to like this so fucking bad. And I didn't. I wanted to like it so fucking bad. It's such a bizarrely put together film, and there's obviously so much that's so fucking impressive. Like, especially for the time. Even now, I'm like, some of these faces look kind of better than some de-aging shit I've seen recently.
Yeah, it's
You
amazing
know,
how many
like,
movies still look as bad as this, I guess is the what we can say. But
yeah. Um, like I don't hate this, but I don't think this works like kind of at all. And it's in a way that's really frustrating because
yeah,
something else the director talked about, like when coming up with like the themes of this film, like he named the main character Aki after his mom, who died several years before the production of the film, and he starts thinking about like what happens to the spirit after we die,
that's a whole. That's
like
actually a lot of because I believe it might be his mother again or his father died of cancer when he was making Final Fantasy VII. So like that influenced a lot of the themes of that game.
oh, see, like all that makes so much sense, and I think that's honestly such a beautiful thing to explore in art. And like I fucking really wanted to like this. This is really bad though.
Mm-hmm.
I'll
So
just leave it at that for now.
I've mentioned I've seen this on cable a bunch of times, and I've always come in like the middle and been just confused out of my mind watching it. I don't think I've ever sat down to watch the whole thing in one go. And I had the classic thing everyone else does, where I'm like, "What does this have to do with Final Fantasy?" Like, I have the same exact response. I get the 2-disc special edition for $3 at a local DVD store. Um, I put it in, and I'm watching it, and I really like the opening. And I'm like, this is actually a pretty good opening. I think they get like what they're going for across very well. But like, I've been here before, and like I've had movies that like we pick these movies for the show, right? And like they have a great opening, and then it's like, oh, the only real idea they had was that opening. Like
Mm-hmm.
that shit happens. And I'm watching it about halfway through. I'm like, this is still kind of working for me. And I'm like, I'm enjoying this. And I'm like, but this is a fucking 2-hour movie. There's no way it can sustain it for the whole 2 hours. And then there's like 20 minutes left of the movie. And I'm like, I like this movie. And then I kind of lose what the fuck's going on in those last 20 minutes. It like finally catered in the last 20 minutes, but not like catastrophically for me, honestly. I walked away from this movie being like, it's me and Roger Ebert. we both
Yeah, our
like
boy
Final
Roger
Fantasy.
Ebert loved it.
The spirits with it. Now, what might have helped is I was taking notes while watching it, so it helped me figure out what the fuck was going on. And what's frustrating about it is it's an incredibly simple story told in a completely convoluted way.
Yeah, you know what? It reminds me a lot of the David Lynch Dune.
Yeah, it is close to Dune.
But this is a much more. It's gonna sound crazy because I was just hyping up like what a great looking movie it was. It's also like the designs of this stuff is very drab, and that is
Yeah.
clearly intentional. But it does make it feel monotonous at a certain point too. Like
Yeah.
again, it's totally intentional. I think there's a way to better capture the designs that they had like mapped out.
Mhm.
It's a lot of gray.
Yeah, no,
And
I
I
think,
get it. I get why
yeah.
that's the purpose of the film and the narrative. It's essential to the narrative.
Mhm.
Um, but it doesn't work for me
Mhm.
like most things in
And,
this movie.
and I'll just say the other reason why this movie probably worked for me is I'm probably the only one that appreciates the PS2 looking cutscene aesthetic. Like, I love
Not,
that pre-rendered aesthetic of that era.
I'm with you there.
So looking at this movie, it didn't like. I was kind of like, I like looking at this. Like, it feels like I'm watching a feature-length video game cutscene, which would be
Mm-hmm.
a complaint for most people, but I kind of like that. Um, and I don't know, it really stuck with me in a way. Like, here's the ultimate problem is that like it's it's insanely generic ultimately, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it does not justify the cost of what it is, you know?
Yeah.
I think that the common criticism Avatar gets is that it's like a beautiful looking movie, it's a huge leap forward in technology, but it's kind of like by the numbers storytelling. And this is even below that, you know? Like, this is it's a lot of very basic archetypes and very limited in its scope for probably a lot of reason. Like, there's a lot of reasonable stuff explaining why the movie is the way it is. But it it doesn't really justify being like this huge leap forward. It's not like the Matrix where it's that meeting of leap forward in technology and a great fucking story. But yeah, and then there are moments where it's just like there's a scene. The first scene that like I really brushed up against is there's the scene where they're in the elevator. It's kind of supposed to be like them rekindling their relationship, and she gets vulnerable about a child who died,
Mm-hmm.
and you can tell that they're giving a lot of emotion in their voice, but they just don't have the technology to make that emotion appear um, on their faces,
Yeah,
and
there's a huge disconnect there, and I think even to the point where some of the performances, like they're either too big sometimes or they're too like withdrawn.
yeah,
Like they're a little like, to go back to the word monotonous. Like Alec Baldwin, I don't think is very good here as a voice actor. I think his character, what's his Gray something Gray, whatever.
Edward Gray Edwards or something like that.
Sure. Oh, of course, his name's Gray. Everything's fucking Gray
I
in
wrote
this.
Captain down because they kept calling him Captain.
Oh yeah, he is Captain.
So,
Maybe he's Captain Gray.
so
Sorry. I don't care about disrespecting Alec Baldwin. But
why would he
he's
do?
he well, he gave a bad performance in this movie, of course. I really did not like
Well,
his
I
performance in
think
this.
I think the actors don't understand like how much of this is voice acting and how much of this is a physical performance.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can get that
Yeah.
feeling. Although fucking dog shit of a person, but James Woods seems to know what to do.
You
Like,
know what? James Woods, he works at least for like being a piece of shit,
yeah,
and for some reason I can't imagine why. His truly great performances are when he's just a repugnant piece of shit.
yeah. You know what's good? Usually people that give those type of performances, they aren't actually scumbags in real life. They just like playing scumbags. Now to look at James Wood's Twitter account and oh no. No. But like also like I think Donald Sutherland does fine, and he feels like the guy who would be the most confused about this movie. Like
He's got a moment where I'm like, oh, that was kind of nice.
he's kind of just the like Obi-Wan of the story, I guess, if you want to call him that.
I guess, but if we're going into archetypes, like he also doesn't die, and
Yeah.
not just because Obi-Wan dies, it's the whole fucking, I forget the story circle bullshit.
He's
But
also named Dr. Sid. Now, Sid is a character that usually appears in the Final Fantasy games. He's usually a mechanic type. There's usually at least someone named Sid. He's also in Kingdom Hearts, by the way. Uh, Although for some reason he looks nothing like Sid, and the name is spelled different. So I don't know what that is.
Maybe it was just like I needed a name for this character.
Yeah. Do you want to give the basic setup of this movie, or do you want me to do it?
I'm gonna read off the Wikipedia for this one because
The Wikipedia will make it more confusing.
you think so?
I do.
Okay. Well, here let me try to sum it up. Humanity and this race of spirits are.
Well, no, we don't. Here's what's fucked up.
No,
We don't.
fuck. Okay, you go,
We
because
don't
I'm
know
gonna
they're
butcher
spirits
this.
until the end of the movie.
I kind of got it from the title, but okay.
Well, no, like it's a weird. It's weird. It's weird. So
Okay.
here's the problem. They use the term phantom and spirits to mean two separate things.
Uh huh.
Uh, so the Earth was invaded by aliens 30 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
They fucking took over. They look like ghosts. Now, what does that mean? Who knows? But since then, Dr. Sid he's a scientist guy. He's developed all this new technology based on this stuff they've discovered since they've discovered spirit energy. Basically, spirit energy, which is a fantasy concept, has been discovered as a scientific force and become the basis for all our technology. And he has this wild theory that actually every planet has something called Gaia, which is the spirit of that planet. at its heart, right? But he can't prove it. Like he basically discovered God using
Mhm.
science and has infused all our technology with this weird mix of fantasy shit and science shit. Now they have to find these things called seven spirits for some reason. And these seven spirits will allow they have to find eight, sorry. I'm all over the place with the numbers.
No, it's not your fault. I'll
Yeah,
say that.
they have to find eight spirits, and what they can do with these eight spirits is they can trap these phantoms without destroying them. And they can kind of trap, like, you have to look at the phantoms almost as like cancer, right? That you can kind of trap it within the body. All of this is not explained directly. Um, but instead, there's an evil guy, James Woods, who's like, why don't we just blow up the spirits? Why don't we just blow up these phantoms? We blow up the meteorite they came in. That will probably kill all of them. We developed a giant laser that should do it. And Donald Sutherland's like, well, we can't do that because it'll kill Gaia. And he's like, well, no one actually, you can't prove Gaia exists. You're a wacky person. So they have to find these spirits before the council approves the use of the giant laser. And that's the plot of the movie.
Yeah, that's technically the plot of the movie.
And I really
It's
enjoyed
not the plot of the movie.
it. I enjoyed it.
It's just it's very dense and it becomes very convoluted and
And I was honestly surprised how restrained they were in exposition.
uh
There's still a
I
lot of it, but
there is a lot of
it's
it.
not as bad as I thought it would be. And they were willing to try to tell the story as visually as possible.
You know
And
what they were?
and
I'll
they
give them
only
credit.
seem to resort to exposition after something has already been explained visually. Like it's more like this exposition is here for the people who haven't caught up. And I kind of appreciated that.
I guess I guess I did. I also just don't think the visual like direction
No, that's it's
is very good either
again,
though.
yeah, it's a lot
You
of great
know.
corridors is the thing. Like you got to get past
Yeah.
that. If you can't, you're never going to get into it.
Yeah, it's a big hang up for me. And like I again, I also understand budgetary groundbreaking
Mm.
technology has
The planet's supposed to
restrictions.
be dead too. Like it's like they found
Yeah.
a thematic way to incorporate it, but
Hmm.
because like the last
The
shot where like they actually get kind of like the end of the movie, you actually start getting like waterfalls and trees and stuff like that, and that seems to be like the point, you know. But it probably
yeah,
been too
yeah.
expensive to do a whole movie like that.
No, no, absolutely. And again, I completely understand the necessity of that in the narrative. Like, this is the right choice. Like, it kind of comes down to like the blocking and like the lighting
I don't know.
of
It
the CG
worked.
environments for me.
It worked for me. I thought it
Oh
told its
God.
story very well visually. Although they do keep finding excuses to get them into like elevators and like cells, you know, like they're on ships.
Hmm.
So it's like there's not much you can go wrong with the blocking here. But
It went wrong enough for me, or maybe it's just I didn't respond to that amount of like hallways and rooms and
well,
corridors.
like I said, to me, it really falls apart once you get into the climax of the movie, which is a lot of them running down corridors and shooting at ghosts, right? Like
Yeah.
that's when it got a little monotonous for me. But like for the first half of it, they mix it up enough where it's like you get the dream sequences, you get the city, you get this weird barrier city, you get ships, you get wastelands. Like they do it a little bit at the start, but then after a while, you're like, oh, this is all they have. Like
Hmm.
so. But I kind of like that. Like our main character, Aki Ross, that's her name, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Aki Ross, she's sent on a mission, and she does an opening like she's like, I've been having this dream, which is a big thing in these fucking Final Fantasy games. That's how Kingdom Hearts starts with a dream.
I know what I was about to say. It's
Yeah,
like I've been having these weird thoughts lately.
yeah. Like, is any of this for real or not? Fucking played that game way too much as a kid.
No, people haven't played it enough.
So it's like I've been having this dream. It's the same planet. I think my dreams hold the key to save the world. And you're like, wow, I don't think that highly of my dreams, but hey. And she kind of does the backstory. Like 30 years ago, aliens invaded, the Earth's destroyed. I think I'm the key to save it. And then the sequence of her going through the city is very it's dialogueless, and we kind of just watch. It's very visually told. Even when the aliens start attacking her, she's not like, oh shit. She's just like running around, and we kind of get an idea of like how these aliens move and what they do. And then the other troops drop in, and we get like, hey, this isn't sanctioned by anyone, so you get like, oh, there's like infighting among these different groups. And I thought it set things up fairly well. Like she's like, we got to get this thing, and they're all like, what? It's a fucking plant. How can that be important? She's like, it's important. And they leave just enough hanging that like you're kind of like invested in what's going on without having to know what's going on. And so few movies fucking do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I responded really well to it. And the crew banter is very stock, but it's not the worst I've ever heard. You know?
It's not the worst. It is stock is the right word.
Yeah.
It's very much. Let me pull up the writers really quick. It's Al Reiner and Jeff Vintar. They co-wrote Apollo 13.
Yeah. And it feels like they were just handed a bunch of insane ideas, and they just
Yeah,
kind of like.
actually, I apologize. They did not co-write Apollo 13.
Uh,
Al Reiner did. Jeff Vintar wrote iRobot.
yeah. But it feels like
My
they were
favorite.
handed a bunch of crazy ideas and themes, and then they brute forced it into a more generic movie. You know?
Yeah, it feels like they really loved aliens.
Yeah, they're definitely aliens inspired.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I vibed the hell with this movie.
I
Uh,
fucking wanted to so bad.
yeah, I liked it a lot. It should be noted that like the top three reviews on Letterboxd, two of them are 1 star and one of them's 3 stars. So
Okay.
I guess I'm the Final Fantasy Spirits Within truther. I guess
Yeah.
I'm like, this is a good movie. Um, but I don't know.
Also, I was to say the highest rated review at the top, the 3-star one you referred to, it just says Square Enix hire this man,
It's
which
pretty
is
funny.
funny. Yeah.
But yeah, and then what I also like about this is I think a problem they talked about is that like the Final Fantasy people that worked on this, they're used to telling stories that are like hundreds of hours long, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're so used to that, so they don't really know how to do a 2 hour narrative. But I think they found a smart solution, which this feels like it's the last few missions of a really long video game. You know, like when she does that speech where she explains where the other spirits came from,
Mm-hmm.
where she lists the 6 spirits they have up until that point. It's like that's the first part of the video game we didn't get to see.
Yeah.
Like collecting spirits is definitely what the plot of this game was, but that's over, and now we're going into the climax of the game. And I kind of was like, that's kind of interesting. It's like, why don't more
It
movies do
is.
this and start at the actual interesting part? Like,
No, that's very true. What you're saying is absolutely correct. Like I still have my criticisms about like just the monotonous of both the visuals and like the emptiness of the like or maybe the narrowness of the narrative, I guess. Like we don't really get a lot of outside perspective. And again, completely understand why they can only focus on a handful of characters and not, hop around the globe
yeah,
or what's left of it in this world. Like this the money and the time and the technology was not there.
yeah.
I get that.
This movie
It is
is
still a hang up for me, but you're right about like the narrative starting point is probably the best they could do, and it is intriguing when you're describing it, hearing it again. I'm like, this is why I wanted to like this movie.
yeah.
I feel like I should be into this.
I feel like I just really responded to the actual plot of the thing, which was like zany enough that like I kind of vibed with it. And
Yeah.
it did enough of the job. Like again, it's not like I'm not like saying like this is a triumph. I'm just like for what it is, it's not the disaster it's made out to be. Like it's just kind of generic is the real problem.
Now, like I didn't hate it, but I really don't think much works here, even though the individual pieces should
Yeah.
work for me.
I don't know. I just feel like it and when I looked at it in the context of it being the natural extension of Final Fantasy, where Final Fantasy VII was at the time. I also kind of vibed with it because it felt like a bit of a time capsule. Um, and yeah, I thought it mixed the things really well. Now it's baffling that this is tied into Final Fantasy at all. It really
Yeah.
shouldn't be. There's basically nothing here other than the references to Gaia. Like that's
Also,
basically it.
it's also the only Final Fantasy related thing to take place like this is our
Yeah, on
Earth.
Earth, yeah, which is even
Yeah.
stranger. That feels like it was probably those screenwriter guys, like being like, we have to fucking tie it down somewhere.
Yeah, or like the producers somewhere, because
Yeah,
like even though the creator of Final Fantasy directed this, there's like money bags that are like, hey, you have to
yeah,
make this more on Earth. I mean, that's why so many like fantasy movie adaptations or whatever, like, we'll bring them to New York or whatever, like
yeah,
Master of the Universe or even recently Barbie.
yeah. Barbie though, at least. Oh, I won't say anything. You haven't seen Barbie yet, have you?
I've not seen Barbie at the time of this recording, and from my understanding, it works out much better in
It definitely
Barbie.
does. It definitely
Um,
because it.
that's probably because both the director and her husband are much better screenwriters
Yeah,
than a lot of the people.
yeah.
So
So and they take
and directors.
yes. So check out Barbie. It's good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
No one has seen it. It's not like it's just fucking eating up the box office right now.
Yeah, I have to save Barbie single handedly, and I will dress appropriately for the occasion. So
Oh
don't worry,
boy.
everyone.
Are you gonna do
Yeah.
full Barbenheimer?
No, but Twitter pal, Hot Toilet Water did that incredible homemade outfit where she walks up in like what looks
Oh
like a
yeah, I
black
saw
dress,
that. That was
and then
amazing.
she twirls around and becomes like a pink dress. Like that's props,
Good
respect.
job.
I wish I knew how to sew so I could live up to that. That was
I wish I
amazing.
knew how to do anything close to that.
Yeah. Like one time I tried to make a scarf. I made a very thick line. So
Did they teach you sewing in school?
absolutely not.
You didn't have like home ec?
No, my middle school K to 8th grade, they kind of they slowly started chipping away at like the arts and
No, okay,
like
yeah.
recreational stuff. So I didn't get much of that.
Yeah, I had to make a bag, and I think I made it inside out, so it didn't work out very well.
Yeah. They replaced arts with calligraphy, so that'll
That's a great idea.
yeah, it's exactly the same part of your brain. So
Yes.
clearly it's a good idea to do that.
Did you have
These
one where
fucking
like
idiots.
engineering could technically count as an art credit?
No, but there was a lot of engineering stuff in high school.
That's what my school did. Like if you took 3 engineering classes, it counted the same as art credits.
I don't
So
know. I liked the engineering stuff and art. I had a terrible art teacher. He was just the coach.
yeah,
It was just it's not his fault. He was an idiot.
was he like
But
the coach in a Ladybird? When the coach took over
he's
the fucking drama department.
a little
You
bit.
come in hot. I think of that scene all the time.